Good evening, all. Tonight is a planning board work session. The date is Thursday, August 15th, 2024. The time is 6:30. Roll call. Susan Axelrod. Here. Joe Murphy. Here. Robin Pothier. Here. Liz Karp. Here. Caper Wilson. Here. Peter DiStefano is absent, and Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is public hearing, major land development change to a previously approved conceptual master plan, 571 Main Street. The purpose of this agenda item is to continue this application to an alternative meeting date in September 2024. No testimony or public comment will be taken during this discussion. Jamie?
So, Madam Chair, I know this was a continuation of the public hearing, as you've stated, to this evening, and again, no public testimony or applicant or staff testimony this evening. We were looking at alternative dates. We had two initial dates in September that were available, and they were September 12th and September 26th. Those are both Thursday evenings. I received correspondence from Matt Landry, who is the applicant's legal counsel, saying that he has a conflict on the 26th and was open to other dates. It is staff's recommendation that you continue this public hearing to September 12th. That is the second Thursday of the month. And because of the council's agenda and schedule with Labor Day, your work session, which normally occurs on the Tuesday, was already pushed to that Thursday, and that's on your annual calendar. So it would be our recommendation that you have an agenda that has 571 Main Street as the first agenda item, and then following that would be your standard work session agenda. Given time availability, there may be an understanding that at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, you may not want to entertain work session items, so you would defer those matters to your next work session.
That makes sense, Jamie, in terms of getting to a particular point in the evening. But I would like to ask board members of their availability, because this is another one of those weeks where you have a Monday holiday, so we get bumped to the Thursday. It would be
September 12th.
September 12th.
Available.
Yes. Okay. Then would someone like to make a motion to continue this item to are we calling it a special meeting or a regular meeting?
A meeting of the planning board on September 12th.
Pretty innocuous.
That begins at 6:30 in the Town Hall Council Chambers.
Can I just clarify that Labor Day is the second week of September this year? Isn't it the second or the?
It's the 2nd of September.
Sorry.
Actually, yeah, that's right. I'm looking at it right now. So then why would we get bumped?
Just bear with me.
Good call.
I'm just trying to work backwards to why your work session was moved to that Thursday.
I don't know why it was moved, Jamie, but it is on the town
Yeah,
council.
it is on our calendar.
It is on the calendar for the 12th.
Does seem odd. But if everyone is able to make it, legal
Yeah.
counsel is good with this as well? It appears that we should just go with it. So would someone
Yeah.
like to make that motion?
I'll second.
Motion from Robin, second from Caper. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Next agenda item, land use regulatory matters, new legislation, legal. And I have a couple questions if you don't have any like specific report per se.
Sure. So I could go through the full update on our memo that we circulated on the 2024 legislative update on land use, or if you preferred, I could just take any questions you have and answer those.
Yeah, I mean, we've had sort of the update, unless anyone feels they need to hear it again. I do have some questions related to, I know that your firm works with other communities, and how are they managing with essentially the subdivision rewrite, developing the standards, and will be a question for Jamie and Brian also, for our special use permits that we have a fairly lengthy list of, despite the fact that we changed some things in the zoning table from S to Y.
So I think many of the communities have eliminated a lot of the special use permits that they used to require, just because they didn't have a good set of specific standards to consider when applying to those special use permits. So instead, oftentimes, they would just change it to a non-permitted use, and then if an applicant came in seeking to have that use, they could request a zone change from the council, which, although it would be a lengthier process, would give the community that discretionary consideration of whether to allow it or not.
Right, because once it goes from an S to a Y.
Right, right. So I don't think that was an intended consequence of that legislation, but it was, a foreseeable consequence that it's really caused a lot of uses that would otherwise be allowed as a special use permit to become prohibited uses.
All the municipal planners had it figured out the minute they read that legislation, knew what the consequences would be, unfortunately. Okay. And Jamie or Brian, how are our standards coming along with our special use permits? Have we even had time to begin that?
I want to say they're in the queue, but as as we discussed at our last work session meeting, right now there are more pressing items within. There's also recent legislation that requires all of the towns to go to online permitting. So we're way ahead of the game on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably in the next 6 months we'll have that operational. And South Kingstown will probably be the model for the state, because I believe we're the only municipality as advanced as we are with our system now that we hope to kind of beta test in the next 2 to 3 months. And again, it's one of those things where there's a lot of behind the scenes formatting and form development and linking that at some point in time we just have to release it, beta test it, and there are going to be some quirks, and we're going to need to work those quirks out as we move through it.
Did we get any money from statewide planning or other state entity to help us with this process?
No.
So another unfunded mandate,
So it,
albeit a positive one in the future, but
again, I believe there was some funding for individuals to do a model, but that was more a model for the state that the towns could use. And I know some of the individuals on the prior land use committees have, like for the online permitting, are tracking our progress, and then potentially would like to borrow what we do. But again, I want to say it's a pressing issue, but if you look at what we took off the special use permit items and either made permitted or made non-compliant or non-conforming, they aren't a significant amount of active type of uses that are regularly asked for. You know, if that makes sense. So in the last, we'll say 12 months, how many special use permits have been granted? And it's probably less than 6. And a good majority of those are for multi-use or variance type items, not necessarily a special use permit to do a particular, we'll say noxious or potentially impactful development that is a special use. The only one you've seen really is the drive-through. And that's the only one that has moved forward through the process that was left off of that list. But again, we've had this now for almost 6 months, and no one has been to our office other than People's Credit Union regarding how come my use isn't permitted any longer. So,
not that we can predict the future, but, and as you may recall, my biggest concern was in areas that are environmentally sensitive, such as coastal areas or the groundwater protection overlay district, that we might have some uses allowed that had not been up to this point, and therefore you wouldn't be able to create the proper conditions if you had changed that to a Y. So just, Brian?
Yeah, I do think that a lot of the S's that we left in the table, we determined that there was already some kind of objective criteria located at various places in the ordinance. So they're not unprotected. They're not just going to sail through as allowed uses. There will be criteria applied to them.
yeah, again, Brian brings out a good point that you were positioned as a community to not just make a decision of permitted as of right or no longer allowed. There were some of the aspects that we had some regulations, some more robust than others, where you still could keep them in the special use criteria. So under that
Yeah,
category.
and it's obviously a good idea to have criteria for these things. It's just so unwieldy to have to develop them within a short time period.
Yeah. Again, we do, as a department, have financial resources for next fiscal year, so starting in July 1 of 2025, for a regulatory refresh. I don't want to say overhaul, because again, our funds are limited, but we do have the ability a little over 10 months from now to potentially bring a consultant on board, whether it's legal, planning, or a combination of both, or financially assisting our existing legal counsel to just do something that's not within the norm of their retainer, and do a more heavy lift on a refresh of our regulations. Again, we would love to tackle that internally. We've had those discussions internally, but it's one of those things that it's a significant commitment on an hourly basis for one or more of our staff members, who then doesn't become available to do some normal day-to-day. So we're a department of 3 planners.
Are there other questions or comments from board members relative to the legislative changes that will be impacting us?
What comes to my mind is situations that have history, and now with the new legislation, are we going to have that situation keep coming in front of the board where, well, now it's allowed, so I want to do it, even though it, at that time, was not allowed?
You may get some situations like that. For instance, there was a drastic overhaul in the accessory dwelling units that will be allowed based on state law, when previously they may not have been allowed, at least in the form proposed by a particular developer prior to the change in law. So if an applicant comes before you now that was previously denied or previously couldn't apply for that type of accessory dwelling use, if they match the new law, they could come before you and it would be allowed. So,
I think, Robin, just to expand upon Peter's response, I think you're dwelling more about we'll say drive-throughs. That wasn't allowed. Say the use similar to drive-throughs. A use that was allowed. The legislation changed. We didn't have criteria for drive-throughs, so the planning board decided to make it a non-permitted use. And then you have an applicant who comes before you who wants to do that. I think the positive side of that, other than an economic delay in development, is that both the planning board is advising kind of with a legislative hint, and the council is acting as a legislative body. So it is within their discretion to approve or deny any changes to the zoning regulations. And I'm sure the planning board, if someone was proposing to add a use, either permitted or special use permit, back into the regulations, you're not going to do that without stringent criteria. The stringent criteria would be first proposed by the applicant, reviewed by staff, modified, and then ultimately comes before the planning board for your opinion to council on whether or not you would recommend approval or approval with some additional language. So it puts you in a very good position with regards to something you were concerned about. In order for it to go back on the books as a permitted use or another special use permit, you are going to have input and oversight on that process. So someone can't just come through and say, you took out drive-throughs, I want it back in, and make it happen. There's a process, you're involved in that process, and you can make a significant amount of recommendations to town council that affects the regulatory change or any standards contained within that regulatory change. So.
I mean, that could bring a lot of cases in front of the board that way, because, we could get swamped with people who say, well, now it's allowed, and they may have developed in such a manner that that doesn't quite fit. They've already kind of maxed out their plan under the conditions they met at the time.
You don't have to say yes. And again,
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
In 6 months, well, again, you don't have to say yes. You don't have to make a favorable recommendation to council. If someone proposes something that you're not comfortable with, or you don't feel the standards are appropriate to protect the interests of the community, you don't have to make a favorable recommendation to the council because you're acting legislatively. Okay. You have broad discretion in your legislative, when you put that legislative hat on. So.
Of course, wouldn't it be ultimately more effective if we were to be able to consider standards in advance of an applicant coming in with a
Right.
essentially biased view of what the standard should be for any given?
Yeah, Maria, you're correct. I don't disagree with your comments, but in the last 6 months, we've had one potential change on a development. It doesn't mean we sit silently for the next 24 months or 36 months and see what happens. It is on our radar and it is on our board.
Any other questions for Peter with regard to legal? One, you mentioned ADUs, and I just read that Newport had a very lengthy meeting about ADUs. Have you seen this in any of the other communities that you work with?
Yes, actually, our office is working as conflict counsel for Middletown to develop I'm sorry, that's slightly different. That's for short-term rentals. But
That's of interest to us as well, as you know.
right. But yes, I think that every municipality is going to have to figure out how they're going to address the accessory dwelling units in their zoning ordinance. There's not a lot of discretion because the General Assembly set the floor of what you must allow. But there is some room around the edges to make some discretionary decisions. But tying that to short-term rentals, the one positive, or you could see it as a positive, is that by state law now, any accessory dwelling unit cannot be used as a short-term rental if it falls under that statute.
And have you seen any conversations about lot coverage in the whole ADU conversation?
That's definitely something to consider. I think you could regulate lot coverage, and you could approach lot coverage. I'm not sure you would want to single out accessory dwelling unit lot coverage, but if you could adjust the generally applicable lot coverage, now understanding that every lot could potentially, every single-family lot could now potentially have 2 dwelling units on it. So lot coverage could be one way to address that.
And just to add on to that, are there any communities that are starting any kind of capacity analysis that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. It's still, I think most of the communities are just beginning to deal with this. I think it's going to take quite a bit of time.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think what you're also seeing, not just in Rhode Island, because there was a challenge to some of the Narragansett regulatory changes, but also in Connecticut and Massachusetts, as towns look at the complexity and demographics of their town and how they're potentially changing as shoreline communities, a number of communities are modifying their regulations to limit the amount of short-term rentals, how a short-term rental is defined. There's a new Connecticut Supreme Court case that came out, I think it was either Madison or Clinton, where someone challenged short-term rentals because in the regulations it defines what a family unit is supposed to be. And a short-term rental isn't necessarily renting to a family unit. And I think there was an interesting dissenting opinion on that, on how specific a municipality defines how a single-family structure is used. Is the definition used as a cohesive, defined unit of group of individuals living there, performing daily tasks, such as working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And they really dove into the weeds of what the definition of a residential unit was. And they referred to some communities who broadly define it, a group of individuals living together under one common roof. Well, with no discussion of time period, cohabitation. So I think as you look at more regulatory aspects associated with short-term rentals, you're going to have to look internal to Rhode Island and external on the national level to see what litigation has come up in maybe the last 2 years and how communities has either won, lost, or indifferent to those changes, so that you don't write language that 2 years ago was defeated in Maryland and someone just lost a case in Connecticut and someone lost a case in Newburyport, Massachusetts, because judges read, attorneys read, and they're going to argue the side of those arguments on the win-loss side. So I think it's an ongoing discussion. You know, a couple of communities tried to limit the number of short-term rentals that were going to be issued in almost a licensing permit standpoint, and they did that on the zoning level. They lost that challenge because the judge ruled that that was a licensing issue and not a zoning issue. So although the Planning and Zoning Commission at town tried to control how short-term rentals were going to happen, and they did it through a police, in this community, in this state, zoning was ruled by a police power under state legislation, but there were defined things they could do and defined things that a town council or board of selectmen could do, and the attorney broke the division, drove a wedge through those two police powers, and ultimately the judge ruled that it was beyond the scope and provisions of a zoning commission's police power, and it lied in the legislative branch, which was the chief elected officials in that community. So people are gonna start cutting hairs as this becomes more regulatory. Another community tried to say if there are 1,000 short-term rentals today, there will only be 800 5 years from now and 500 10 years from now. So that means either people aren't allowed to renew, or as they come out, at some point someone's gonna lose their right. Someone lost that on challenge because once someone has a vested right in something, you typically can't take that away from them. So, but it all lies in how the regs were originally written and worded.
Yep. And of course, we know decisions can vary from
Judge to
considerably.
judge, case to case.
And I mean, there are, around the world, Barcelona's an example, that are eliminating them completely because they don't have housing, it's impacting so many things, so kind of interesting. If there are no other questions for Peter, Planning Board Liaison Activities, Joe, do you want to talk about the Affordable Housing Collaborative?
Well, I wasn't able to make the last,
There was no last meeting. We didn't have a quorum for it.
oh, okay. Oh, I did talk to the chairman. I was aware that there was a quorum, and I also, my understanding, they were considering asking the town council to reduce the number to possibly to 5 instead of 7 and make it a little easier for the quorum. And there was also frustration expressed, at least to me, relative to the missing middle. And I don't know, Brian, if you can validate or not validate that that's not the case, or it is, but there's frustration. You know, it's a board just like we are, and they're trying to make a difference in the town. And they're having a hard time keeping members, and I think, you know, we're all here for the same reason, which is if we feel like we'll make a difference, we stay, and if we're not making any difference, then it's not worth our time. But anyways, there's a lot of frustration about the missing middle, from my understanding. Brian, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the same discussions with the chair, and you've been at the meetings, Joe. You know, there was a piece of, proposed draft legislation written for consideration, and I think they feel that it's an important component of trying to develop affordable housing here, and that they are disappointed not to have seen a more robust discussion of that proposed ordinance at the planning board level.
So I think, and just not to be surprised, I don't know if they will or not, but my understanding is they're considering going directly to the town council to request that be a priority.
That certainly is an option, as with any citizen in the town, and in this instance, they actually have a draft ordinance that's already been prepared, and they've already been in communication with at least one council member that I'm aware of who has expressed interest in the situation.
I can give a little background on the Scenic Stewardship Committee. The town has retained Beta Engineering to work on developing the stewardship plan. It is in draft form, and the committee met this month, and we'll be meeting again in September to, continue to review it and add language as necessary or make changes. We just received the first draft from Beta in August, so it's moving along at this point in time. That's all I have. Update from planning?
Microphone, Jamie.
I'm just going to put a slide on the screen just quickly. Just as an update, as we move through process with our consultant team at Union Studios on the potential redevelopment or repurposing of 3 municipally owned or controlled properties, being the South Road School, the Wakefield Elementary School, and the Oliver Watson property in West Kingstown, that they are holding, in essence, 4 public outreach meetings. The first is scheduled for August 22nd, that is next Thursday, and that is planned at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at the South Road School. Union Studios will be reviewing concept plans regarding the style and type of development that may be possible on that property. The next meeting would occur tentatively on September 29th, and that is for the Wakefield Elementary School. That meeting is scheduled to be here in the Town Council chambers at 6 p.m. with an 8 p.m. kind of target for wrapping things up. And again, that is a discussion on the redevelopment of that property. The third meeting in the series is scheduled for September 5th, again 6 to 8 p.m. That's for the Oliver Watson property. We are trying to finalize the site in West Kingstown to hold that meeting. It may be at one of our local churches or at the Union Fire District facility off of Fairgrounds Road. And then the fourth meeting in that series, which I gave a handout on, is scheduled for September 19th. That again is a Thursday evening, 6 to 8 p.m., again in the Town Council chambers, and that is for boards and commissions. So that as a board commission member, if you're unable to attend any of the other meetings, you will have an opportunity as an individual or as a unified group to comment and opine on the proposals to redevelop those 3 properties.
So Jamie, the first 3 meetings are specific to location, but the third one, I'm assuming then will discuss all of the locations?
Yeah, the fourth meeting, yeah.
Fourth
So,
one.
sorry, yeah. So South Road School there is no discussion or plans conceptually will not be revealed for Wakefield or Oliver Watson. And then at the Wakefield Elementary School, the subject of discussion is the Wakefield Elementary School. Then we move to Oliver Watson, and then there's an all-encompassing meeting for all 3 sites with all boards and commission, as well as any member of the public who wants to attend.
So do we envision the missing middle as a part of this discussion?
So within each development scheme, there are potential aspects of missing middle. South Road School may be, if we look at the chart, single family to large apartment complexes, may be more on the smaller scale, single family, duplex, triplex. There was one potential concept that shows a larger building on the site. But again, all of the intent is to show the development potential, different styles of housing, and what that would look like.
So
And
this question to Joe then, is a single-family house a middle-range house? I mean,
No.
Well, when I think of missing middle, I'm thinking above a duplex and below the 12-unit
Joe, can you pull the mic in front of you so?
So what I'm thinking of missing middle, and I'm sure Jamie has a better definition, but above a duplex, and something between there and what a 12-unit apartment complex would be. So, you know, a 4-unit, a 6-unit.
Joe, that's a fair description. Again, we have both ends of the spectrum. The lower side being a single-family unit, then it goes duplex, triplex, fourplex, mansion house is in the realm of the 3, 4, 5, 6plex. Then you go to what's called a stack flat. Those are typically 6 to 12-unit apartment buildings, center hallways, elevators. 2 floors, you can do a walk-up, but most people still go through the cost of an elevator. And then to the right-hand side, or the higher scale of that side, you start to talk about the larger apartment complexes, 2, 3 stories, multiple buildings on a project.
This is a good opportunity to get some middle in then.
Well, it's a middle discussion for 3 town-owned properties. So I think the housing collaborative is a more broader discussion about those types of uses on other properties in town, not just town-owned property. But again, it's a good introduction to a continued discussion.
And, go ahead.
I think that the affordable housing is more interested in the overall, how do you fit mix and middle into our regulations and into the community, not just on the town stuff. But I guess, Jamie, I think what would be interesting on this specific is not necessarily the housing type, but the demographics that they're targeting based on the area and location within the town. So the demographics at South Road, there may be a different ideal demographics there versus Wakefield, where you're in the walking distance versus driving distance versus playgrounds and sports facilities versus, you know, commercial properties.
Yeah, so again, I think as you see the development options kind of come alive, you'll see a range of options, and there are really 3 kind of distinct and different sites. South Road is 8 to 10 acres of developable land. It doesn't have sewer, but it could have sewer. So depending on how you provide sewer and water to the site impacts density. You are more car-centric at South Road because of its proximity to services, jobs, and bus routes. On the other end of that spectrum is the Wakefield School. Walkable to services, walkable to downtown. You could say walkable to grocery, walkable to pharmacy. And that may attract a different demographic,
Yeah.
but it also may attract the same demographic who's looking for a different type of lifestyle. So it's a unique discussion that will occur. Union Studios with their team is also looking at the cost of development given the density, because that will affect the long-term viability of being able to actually build a project. You know, you can't build something that is unattainable on the financial side because the infrastructure is too expensive, the density is not compatible to the cost of infrastructure. To make it work, you would need an excessive amount of federal or state funding. So again, they're trying to find a balancing act on the financial side so the projects have a chance for success.
Is all these projects pretty much been dedicated to be for housing?
The town council's primary initiative, I'd like to say, is bringing affordable housing to the marketplace, but they also have had discussions about integrating mixed-use components within those development scenarios. Again, there are greater opportunities probably in Wakefield versus South Road as far as that mixed-use component, and Oliver Watson is somewhat isolated and residential in nature and surrounding area.
And so this is just a comment, but I mean, if I was king for the day, it would be nice if there was more private affordable housing and missing middle so that there wasn't as much pressure to use town property for that. I certainly see, and I'm obviously a big supporter of the housing, and I see a couple of these that would be great, but it would also be nice to maybe use one of these for other things that the town, that would make it more vibrant, and so this, I thought.
Yeah, I sort of had that same question for Jamie. I know that the Economic Development Committee had been asked by the council for input on Wakefield Elementary School, and I believe that although it's not terribly detailed, their sort of primary suggestion was some kind of mixed-use commercial type use that would be very compatible with Main Street. So that's why I was surprised to see that it was all housing initiative, including the various spaces, rather than kind of reuse scenario. But and do you think that because we're talking about town-owned land, that would create more flexibility for what might be done on those properties, and also act as sort of a pilot test site?
I think there's a couple of different aspects to respond to your question, Maria. I think it's flexibility in control of product, right?
Right.
You can develop a concept that becomes acceptable to the community, and in any delivery of that concept, parameters can be built and developed into any contractual agreement that the product or pretty picture they showed actually ends up being the product that delivers. So you've seen over time and time again that there's a pretty rendering done by a well-intentioned group, design team, consultant. You change the regulation, the result of the actual development looks different than your conceptual plan because someone has valued engineered it, someone has changed the architecture. And I think the unique aspect of this, because they are in control of the town, that the town has a lot of insight into what the final product will be versus just a density.
Right.
And we'll use 20 manufactured homes with minimal architecture, where the town could actually dictate the standard of architecture or literally approve 6 types of homes down to the exterior detail that they have to do.
So is Union Studios only looking at architectural design and the actual cost of development for an applicant, or are they also considering the cost of community services, capacity, impact on the environment, and how it relates to sustainability and climate change?
So
Because none of us have
a
seen
very
the scope.
broad, faceted question.
Well,
Again, we're at the conceptual level now, so they are not necessarily, I'm not aware that they're in their contract, they are looking at fiscal impact based on density. One would argue there was a school there, so there was a fiscal impact, whether that was negative or positive, because there was a cost to operating that school. If you bring this on board as housing, there will be taxes paid on the housing built. Does it increase the cost to operate wastewater treatment? I'm not sure. Does it require an additional police officer? You're talking about a community with 31,000 residents that you may be adding 120 residents to 31,000, or in that range. It's a little blip in the big picture of the overall demographics of the town.
I understand that.
it's
Just
a
fire,
good
police,
observation.
School, all
Yeah.
of those things.
Yeah.
And since we haven't seen the contract, we don't know how limiting that might be, which will influence the perspective that they.
Again, I'm relatively confident in my knowledge of the contract that it doesn't include a fiscal analysis of the impact of development on existing services in the town: police, fire, school, public service, road, snow removal, etc.
Jamie, is there any thought to which one of these properties would go first? And because that might impact what happens to the other properties.
Again, the consulting team is tasked with developing concepts for all three. As a planner, you look for that, that perfect storm, that the three properties and the concepts are well received by the community, and either nonprofits or developers are fighting with each other for which one they start first and how quickly they can do it, and they're okay with all of the standards and all of the architecture and all of the landscaping and all of the things that make beautiful developments and beautiful communities within the entirety of the town. That's what I would hope happens. But typically there will be one site that rises to the top that seems to be the best received, that has the least obstacles, and typically one may move forward more quicker than the others.
So maybe more like sweet spot rather than perfect storm.
Yeah. Again, they're all, you just look at Wakefield. Sewer and water's in the street.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I don't need to extend a sewer line. I don't need to figure out water, fire suppression or anything. It's in the street. It exists. South Road, depending on the density, I may have to bring sewer in. All right, the development or some financial resource has to pay for that sewer line installation. Does that take 6 months or 12 months in permitting and financing and everything? Could. So you may say Wakefield's more shovel-ready, but there may be more resistance to what eventually happens to the Wakefield school, where there's less resistance to Wakefield or less resistance to Oliver Watson. So I think one thing that's nice as an example in this process is that council did support at least what I would call a fairly robust public interaction, that we're actually having these 4 workshops. We're going out to the community with conceptual plans that people can react to, and then plans get refined, and ultimately council may choose to move forward with one or all 3. But I'm sure they will be heavily discussed and debated and may look different, slightly different than the original concepts. But I think it's a good process to date.
Absolutely, it's great that they're having these open forums.
Yeah.
Good way to solicit.
Again,
public
sometimes the
input.
process would have been consultant comes back, develops concept plans, there's one meeting, the public comes out, they just see it, they're not happy, they don't have an opportunity to respond, they receive those comments, the consultant revises the plans, and then council makes a decision. But again, to have a consultant come out to 4 separate meetings, have a 2-hour commitment to discuss one concept on one, it's multiple concepts on one property, versus you could be at a meeting where everybody, if you're discussing all 3, you could have one entire group kind of hijack the meeting because they're all from one of the surrounding neighborhoods, and you never really get into the meat of another. So again, we're trying.
It's a very good idea.
And we will do PR pushes. We just did a press release on the town. We'll be sending that out to the newspapers, so we'll try and get the word out. We are going to send mailers to abutting property owners. I think property owners within 200 feet of South Road. Those will go out tomorrow. So at least abutters will get a personal invitation.
That's very proactive.
So I'm sure we'll be criticized of why we didn't do 500 or 1,000.
No, it's
But we
good.
do know
It's good.
at South Road, one of the properties hits one of the HOAs, so the HOA of one of the developments nearby will get notified. So again, there's also that final 4th meeting where if someone missed the South Road, they'll have an opportunity to catch that 4th meeting.
How many boards and commissions are we up to now?
I don't have
More than
the,
13, I think, right?
I don't have
Something
the
like
exact
that,
number on
yeah.
that. Over 10.
Yeah.
The original concept for that fourth meeting, though, my understanding was that boards were going to be limited in the number of representatives they could send to that meeting. Is that still the case?
I don't think we've
Seems odd.
finalized any limiting factors on that. I think that they want to give people, if you went around the room and they may ask for the planning board to have a representative to speak first, and then every board and commission kind of has a representative that speaks, but then it's open. If planning and conservation are the only two boards and commissions there, I think to have a productive, you would just open it up to everyone, but we haven't finalized the structure of that meeting yet.
And particularly since there's the conversation of more than one site,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I think we should try to welcome as many board and commission members as we can. Do you have an update on Old Tower Hill Road for us?
We have a draft plan that we are reviewing internally from Able City East, who took over for Dover and Cole. That is a 136 or 135 page document. And that is basically a review of what was done at the charrette and kind of how you package that and move to the next step. So we're reviewing that internally. Once we're comfortable with that, we'll provide comments to Jason King, and as we revise those comments, if they're not substantial in nature, we'll release those to planning, EDC, conservation, and council for comments before they move to the next step, which is the regulatory side.
Anything else?
I'm just going to go back to my list for a minute.
Sure.
Maria, from just as a PR push under the facade program, we do have $1.2 million. Applications, I think, go to August 29th, but we are taking them on a rolling, just looking, let's go back before I misspeak. August 30th is the end date for submissions. We are vetting 4 applications at this time. We just received the 5th. We're anticipating another 4 or 5 to come in. So again, we're doing that on a rolling basis. We're trying to hit a September meeting for council with recommendations from our 6-member panel on who may be eligible for funding and at what levels. So that is moving forward. Just going back to our list. You already mentioned the Route 1 stewardship plan, EMS project with Union Studios. That is in, we're at vetting 90% mechanicals right now, so towards the end of this month we have full architecturals, full mechanicals, full site development, and we'll be preparing that for an RFP for construction of that building. Again, we're trying to be conscientious of our budget, so we're doing budget estimating right now. I don't like the word value engineering, but we are going through that process, but I am trying to dig my heels in on the aesthetic components because I think there was a substantial commitment made to the community, the neighborhood, as well as the land trust with regards to what that building needs to look like. It's mostly material choices, not the aesthetics. So,
It's been a lengthy time period for obviously a demonstrated need in that part of the
yes.
community. Yeah.
Wakefield Library, interior renovations and parking lots. The town just did receive I believe, did we receive 65 or 85,000, Brian, in a grant?
Yeah, we received a $66,000+ Bay and Watershed Restoration Fund grant for parking lot and stormwater improvements along Indian Run Brook in front of the Guild. And because we already have final plans for that, thanks to the Southern New England Project grant we received a couple of years ago, that's pretty much shovel-ready to be put out to bid and tasked. So hopefully, you know, we'll see that in fairly short order. I have to sit down with Rich Bourbonnais at Public Services and Rex Eberly at Recreation and start working on getting that hammered out.
And Madam Chair, those are
Great.
my primary updates today.
Okay. I just had a couple things that weren't an update, just logistics as far as planning board. We have spoken in the past about trying to avoid the scenario where we have 6 public hearings in one meeting, trying to spread those out to the greatest extent possible, trying to have conversations with the applicant ahead of time, despite the fact that there may be inherent deadlines associated with it, but from a practical perspective, and value everyone's time, staff, board, members of the public, and applicants. We want to try to manage that. The other thing is that it would be helpful, I think, for board members. It's great that Lynn is sending out the agendas well in advance, but if there will not be a packet associated with an agenda, whether it's a special meeting, a work session, whatever, it would be helpful if that were stated on the email to board members so that they're not waiting for a packet that may not materialize. Just a thought. And then the only other thing is, it would also, I know that Jay had in the past sent board members out the TRC agendas, just as an FYI. It would be nice if that could continue, just so we're in the loop, even though we understand that some things on the TRC may not necessarily come to the board in any kind of immediate sense, but just to keep everybody in the loop.
And just on the note of packets, we will be, in all likelihood, hand delivering packets moving forward. I did inquire with the local postal office on the delay. So any large packets go from South Kingstown to Providence, from Providence back to the Maine, and then distributed from Maine to potentially West Kingston. So that's why I think we sent packets out on a Tuesday before a Thursday meeting, and you didn't get them until Wednesday. We sent them out 8 days ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, Jamie, I'm wondering, you know, it costs like $10 to $12 to mail me a packet, where I could pick it up. Maybe there's a way of saying packets are ready, and those...
If everybody was willing to pick up a package, we can literally say packages are ready and leave them in the planning office. I just don't know what everybody's availability is to be in the town hall between 8:30 and 4:30. Yeah.
It depends. For me,
If
it
there's a
depends on the time of
problem, I
year
could
and
deliver them.
work.
Again, we haven't had issues delivering them in the past. We kind of have a system between 3 or 4 of us. We kind of head a little bit home, maybe half an hour early to deliver those packages and end on the day. So, but if someone is specific to say, Robin, if you're specific to say, you know, you don't need to deliver it to me, just let me know and I will be by in the next couple of days. Okay. Yeah. Right. No, it's still an hour plus of staff time to deliver them, but again, we can assure delivery. I don't want to have the scenario where there was an 8-day delay and everyone's like, you know, I would have liked to have this for the weekend and now I'm not getting it to the day before the meeting. And we sent it out X number of days earlier. So, and also I know a few members are, don't send me a packet, I'm fine with it electronically too. So.
And perhaps if we know they're available, I could arrange my errands that, I went all the way into town, and I could grab it, letting you know I'm going to come get it and save that person that,
We can leave it at Joe's house, that's closer to you. No. So again, I think near term, we'll be delivering them, and we'll see how that goes.
Anything else from your list? I do want to remind everybody that Jamie has a nice stack of books in the office, planning books, and I had hoped to get here a little earlier this evening and bring them up so that everybody could kind of leaf through them, but please make the effort to have a look at them, and at a future work session, perhaps we can do that. and
They're
I
not
can
all
bring-
there right now.
Oh, they're not? So someone has checked
Two-
them out?
Two members have taken advantage and have checked
Excellent.
out books. So,
Excellent. And I have a few that I'd like people to just glance at that we do not yet have, but that hopefully we will. Do we have any other legal updates? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion, but before I do, just administratively, we need new name tags recognizing Susan in her position and Liz and...
Thanks, Joe.
And then I will make a motion to adjourn.
Motion from Joe, second? Second from Robin. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.